All right, let's talk about the Supermarine Spitfire. We're going to dive into the insane engineering that turned this one aircraft into an absolute legend of the skies. So, to really get the Spitfire, you've got to picture this. It's the summer of 1940. Britain's survival is literally hanging by a thread. Everything depended on this brand new, revolutionary air defense network that was about to face the ultimate test. And right at the heart of this whole system was a frantic race against the clock. From the very first blip on a radar screen, pilots had just 10 minutes. That's it. 10 minutes to scramble their planes and get into the air. And that 10-minute window, it wasn't a suggestion. It was an absolute limit. It meant they needed a totally new kind of fighter, an interceptor that could climb like a rocket, just to have a chance of meeting those enemy bombers before it was too late. So all of this incredible pressure, it pretty much fell on the wings of one aircraft. You guessed it, the Supermarine Spitfire, the plane that had to defend an entire nation. All right, let's really get into it. To understand just how revolutionary the Spitfire was, we gotta look at what the RAF was flying before it showed up. So check this out. When the Spitfire prototype first flew in 1936, the Royal Air Force was still flying biplanes, stuff like the Gloucester Gauntlet. Now, those planes were tough for sure, but they created a ton of drag. The Spitfire, with its sleek, all-metal, low-wing design, man, that wasn't just an upgrade. It was a complete revolution, a total game changer. Okay, let's talk about its most famous feature, right? That gorgeous elliptical wing. But here's the thing. The reason it has that shape, it's probably not what you think. For years, the story we've all heard is that this elegant curve was all about aerodynamic perfection, that it was simply the best, most efficient shape you could have to minimize drag. But then you have the chief designer, R.J. Mitchell, who set the record straight with a much more practical reason. When someone asked him about the shape, he basically said, "I don't give a bugger whether it's elliptical or not, so long as it covers the guns." And that's the key right there. Sure, the shape was aerodynamically good, no doubt, but its real genius was structural. That beautiful curve was the perfect way to create enough internal space for everything they needed to cram in there. The landing gear, a super strong wing spar, and, of course, a devastating arsenal of 8 machine guns. And that design choice gave the Spitfire a huge advantage in combat, especially against its main rival, the Messerschmitt Bf 109. You see, the Spitfire's wing had a larger area, which meant it had a lower wing loading. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying you take the plane's total weight and divide it by the area of its wings. So why does that matter? Well, lower wing loading is the secret sauce for a tighter turn. When a plane banks, its lift has to do 2 jobs: turn the plane and keep it from falling out of the sky. Because of its lower wing loading, the Spitfire could pull into a way tighter, more aggressive turn than the Bf 109 could, all without stalling. And in a dogfight, that is literally a life-or-death advantage. Okay, but a fantastic airframe is useless without a killer engine, right? So let's look under the hood. The Spitfire had one of the all-time greats, the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin. Now, the Merlin was an absolute beast of an engine, but early in the war, it had a major weakness. It used something called a float carburetor to mix fuel and air. And honestly, the best way to think about it is that it works kind of like the float in your toilet tank. So what's the problem with that? Well, if a Spitfire pilot pushed the nose down hard into a dive, what they call a negative G maneuver, that float would just drop, flooding the engine with fuel. And poof, the engine would cut out. The German pilots in their fuel-injected Bf 109s figured this out super fast. All they had to do to escape was nose over into a dive, and the Spitfire chasing them will be left sputtering in their wake. This whole carburetor issue, it really just highlights this constant, relentless technological arms race that was going on. You had engineers on both sides pushing engine design to the absolute breaking point, especially when it came to fighting at high altitude. See, the basic problem for any fighter back then was pretty simple. The higher you go, the thinner the air gets. Thinner air means less oxygen for the engine to burn fuel, which means less power. The solution? A supercharger. It's basically just a big compressor that crams more air into the engine. But here's where the Bf 109 actually had an edge, at least at first. Its engine had a more advanced variable speed supercharger. That gave it way better power at lower altitudes. The Spitfire's supercharger, on the other hand, was simpler. It was a single-speed job, which meant it was really only optimized for one specific altitude. But the Spitfire had a secret weapon, an ace up its sleeve. It was this piece of tech that they'd perfected in pre-war air racing, a really advanced cooling system. See, by pressurizing the engine's coolant, British engineers figured out they could let it get way hotter without it ever boiling over. And why does that matter? Because a hotter liquid gets rid of its heat way more efficiently. This meant the Spitfire could get away with using much smaller, more aerodynamic radiators than the BF-109. And that massive reduction in drag, it helped make up for the Merlin engine being a little bit smaller, and it made the Spitfire a more efficient, more slippery plane all around. So, when you put all these pieces together, it becomes really clear that the Battle of Britain wasn't won by some single, flawless superweapon. It just wasn't that simple. The truth is, the Spitfire and the BF-109 were incredibly evenly matched. The Spitfire could turn tighter than the 109, sure, but the 109 could often climb faster and dive harder. Each plane had its own strengths, and it was up to a skilled pilot to exploit them. In the end, the whole thing was decided by the absolute slimmest of margins. It was this incredible combination of brilliant engineering, the unbelievable skill and bravery of the pilots, and that game-changing radar and command system on the ground, the system that gave them that crucial 10-minute head start. And it kind of leaves you with this big question that echoes through all of history, doesn't it? In any high-stakes fight, what's the thing that really decides who wins? Is it the best tech, the best strategy, or is it just the skill of the people involved?